guys, Sai here. If you've ended up on my channel, I'm going to assume that you're interested in oil painting and you want to learn how to paint portraits. For those who don't know, I am a portrait painter based in central London, and this video is going to be all about the materials and equipment you're going to need to get started. I'm aware that in the art world there are loads of misconceptions about oil painting. Lots of people think oil paints are super expensive to buy, they're super difficult to use, they take ages to dry, and they're just not much fun. I promise you guys, that is completely not true, and I really hope that my videos over the next few weeks can show you just how easy oil paints are to use, just how affordable they are to buy, and just how fun they are. Here are 6 items I think are essential if you want to start learning how to paint portraits. The first item I recommend is a paint pad. You need something to work on, and the one I use is by Winsor & Newton. I'll put all the details for all of the products and the prices in the description below, and apologies if I say it wrong in the video, I need to double check some prices. But yeah, so the first thing I recommend is getting a pad. Obviously with oil paints, lots of people like to work on canvas, on wood, on all kinds of materials, but I think if you're just getting started, invest in one of these and you won't regret it. This one's actually quite big. It's because it was a gift. My nan got me it for Christmas, and it's actually the wrong pad. You'll see here it says acrylic, and if you're just starting out, I'd recommend getting an oil paper pad because it just means you don't have to prime it. When it comes to oil painting, because of the material, you need to make sure you're working on paper that has been primed. And if you buy an oil pad, it comes primed, you can put your paint straight on it. The problem with this is that it's not already primed, so I will have to use some primer and paint it before I apply oil paint onto it. However, I actually prefer it. I think that you get such a smoother finish. I don't know if you can tell, but acrylic paper is a lot smoother than oil paper. You don't get as many grooves. I think with oil paper they try and replicate like canvas material to make it feel more like you're using a canvas. For me, I prefer to work on wood, so I like it as smooth as possible. So for me, I actually enjoy buying acrylic paper and then priming it. Invest in a pad, you get loads of pages. You can cut it up to the right size, so then you have even more pages to practice on. And just remember that you can either go for an oil paper pad, so then you can apply your oil straight onto it, or you can go for an acrylic pad like myself, and you get a much smoother finish, but you will have to prime it yourself, which obviously then you're having to buy a primer too, but they're not too expensive, and I'll talk about that product later. The next product you're going to need are paintbrushes. I feel like this is kind of an obvious one because you need something to apply the paint onto the page. The ones I use are called flat-headed paintbrushes. It's important that if you are following my videos, you try and get similar products, just because otherwise it probably won't make sense when I'm talking about certain items. But I love flat-headed paintbrushes. There are loads of different ones out there, but it just means that they have that like straight top, as opposed to like being rounded, or I don't know, there's loads of different shapes out there. But yeah, get yourself some flat-headed paintbrushes. These literally cost me, I think, £5, $4.99 maybe, from Amazon Prime, came the next day. What's great is they are really affordable. I sometimes get messages on Instagram and people are like, oh, what brushes do you use? And I think people are under the impression that you can get some really special paintbrushes that are going to make your work so much better. Yes, obviously, like anything, the more you spend, the better quality things are, and they probably won't fall apart as quickly as these ones do. But I do think that if you do take care of them, clean them after each use, these will be perfect for you. One thing I would say is there are some really small brushes, and you want to make sure the pack you get has the really tiny ones, the really tiny rectangular ones, because I use them the most. You get the big ones, which are great for backgrounds and things, but when it comes to details, you kind of want smaller brushes. So the next essential item that I use every time I paint is oil paint. And we actually only need 5 colours. Obviously there are loads of colours out there. There's some really unusual, rare shades and tones that exist that you can literally spend so much money on. But all you're going to need is a blue, a red, a yellow, a brown and a white. These are the ones I use. It's Pebeo, I think the brand is. And so I use a titanium white. a cadmium red, a burnt umber for brown, an ultramarine for blue, and a cadmium yellow. All of these paints cost no more than £8. The small ones this size cost me, I think it's literally like £4, $3.99, whereas this size it was like £8. As for the colours, I will be creating a video at a later point explaining why I've chosen those colours, but you actually only need them to make all of the skin tones, all of the shades, and to make great portraits. You're not going to need a rare pink or a rare whatever. These are essential colours, and I've managed to create all of my portraits using them. This is a palette knife. Palette knives are so handy for mixing paint. If you are familiar with art, if you're an artist maybe who normally uses acrylic paint, you will see a big difference when you're using oil paints. The texture is very different. It's much more creamy, sticky, and thick. So it can be quite difficult to mix with a paintbrush, and you can actually damage your brush if you're trying to mix the paint with a paintbrush, unlike acrylic, which you can literally mix easily. But because it's oil paint, you kind of need one of these to mix up your skin tones or whatever colours you're using. So definitely get some palette knives. You'll see that my one's actually quite bendy, and I've had some in the past that snapped at the top. So although these are quite cheap, it's like anything, if you pay a bit more, it'll probably last you a lot longer. But yeah, palette knives, really handy. You're going to need it to mix with your paints. So the next essential item is this. This is called Odorless Mineral Spirit. This is where I think people start getting confused, because when things like this are introduced that they've not heard of before, people get a bit nervous. Basically, if you've ever used acrylic paint, this works just like your water does. So in an acrylic painting, you'll mix your paints and then you'll dip your brushes in water to clean your brushes or to maybe thin the paint. This works the exact same. Since my studio is actually my bedroom also, it's not the safest thing to be breathing in as you sleep. So I recommend finding a product, a spirit that is safe to breathe in, because I don't want anybody getting sick, and we've got to think about our health. But yeah, definitely invest in this. It will make your life so much easier when it comes to cleaning your brushes. So the next item to me is an absolute must-have. Most people have it in the house, lying around, because it's literally a bit of cloth. I use old clothes, usually a top I don't like, and I turn it into my like oil painting cloth. A big part of oil painting and creating portraits involves wiping your brushes, and it's something that's never discussed in videos that I've watched anyways. And I realised before I learnt that tip, my paintings never went well, but I'll go into that at some point. But basically, definitely have some cloth. Okay, so there you have it, 6 essential items before you can get started. You're going to need your pad, your paint, your palette knife, your mineral spirit, and your rag. Now, you're probably thinking, I feel like something's missing, I'm going to need something else. And that's completely right. I might have lied slightly. Yes, you need just 6 items, they're the essentials, but there are a few other things that you can get that are going to make life so much easier. First thing is an art easel. An art easel is obviously like a big stand to put your work on when you're working. However, they can be quite expensive. What I use is this. Okay, so it once looked kind of pretty. It's now not the nicest looking, but it's a tabletop easel. I think that's what it's called. I'll double check and put it below. But it's basically a surface to work on that you can move around. So this will go on your desk, and you can lean this forward like that or further back, depending on the angle you want to work. It's super handy to have. It makes my life so much easier, and it's small. My bedroom's quite small, so I can just put it on the floor if I don't need to use it, put it on a shelf. It's not too heavy, and again, it's movable, so depending on your paper size or the angle you want to work, it's really handy in that sense. One thing I've learned when I started doing portraiture is it really helps with proportions to have the work in front of you instead of flat on a desk. This is because I think when it's like that, you can't see the top and things just get a bit messy, and then you lift it up and you're like, whoa, that looks so wrong. So you want to try and find an easel or a surface to work on that is directly in front of you. I tend to work from a wall, literally my bedroom wall, and I have a pot of white paint. Every now and then I touch it up when I've like put paint on the wall accidentally. But yeah, that's why I didn't put it on my list of 6, because most people have access to a wall, so just use your wall. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you don't want to buy a tabletop easel right now, the wall is absolutely fine. The next non-essential item that I do recommend buying is frog tape. Frog tape is basically a fancy masking tape. It just has a really low tack, so it's not too sticky. And what that means is you can use it to put your artwork on the wall, because we were mentioning painting from the wall. And you can stick it up with this, and then you can take it off and it won't damage your work because it's not that sticky. For example, I am just prepping a piece of paper for a painting, and I use it as a border, just so it has a nice finish at the end, and then you can stick it straight onto the wall, she says. Like this, and then you can take it off the wall. It doesn't damage the wall paint, and then when you take it off, you get a nice finish like this if you want a border. I think it just makes it look a lot more professional. Like anything, frog tape isn't perfect, and it still is super sticky. So I do recommend, before applying the tape directly onto the paper, sticking it onto your clothes, your bedding, your jumper, I don't know. I was gonna say your dog, don't do that. And just basically removing some of the tack before you put it directly onto the paper. Keeps it on the safe side, because I have had in the past the odd occasion when I've tried to remove it and it has caught the paper underneath and ripped it slightly. But there's different angles you can pull the tape and different little tricks and hacks, which I will show you in a later video. But definitely consider buying this frog tape. It's literally so cheap, it's like £3. This one was a bit more because it's wider, but that was actually unintentional. I thought I had a thinner one. You don't really need it to be this wide. But yeah, super cheap. Not essential, but it is really useful, especially if you don't have an art easel, or if you don't really have a set studio and you just want to chuck some work up. Even if you're photographing work and you just want to put it somewhere, I literally put a bit of this in the back of an image, stick it on the wall, then remove it. The next non-essential product that I recommend getting at some point is linseed oil. The one I'm using is Refined Linseed Stand Oil by Michael Harding. But yeah, basically, this is one of those products that I think does confuse people. It's one of those things that it's like, we don't need this when we paint with acrylics or watercolour, so why do we need it for oil? But basically, it's a super handy product, and we're very lucky that this kind of thing exists. Because what it does is it slows down the drying time of a painting. Say you have a big commission and it's going to take you a while, and you've mixed out some colours, specific colours that are hard to replicate, and you're like, God, I really don't know if I've made enough, and I hope this doesn't dry out because I don't know how I'm going to get this colour again, or just perhaps to save you constantly mixing colours, you can add a bit of this, and what that will mean is when you come back to that paint in 2 days, it will still be wet. Again, 2 days is just a guess. It depends how much you put in, and obviously what paints you're using, what environment you're in, but it's a handy thing to have, especially when you're working on a larger scale, especially if you're in maybe a hot environment. It's not an essential product, but it is something that most oil painters have, and sometimes I drop a bit in. It's one of those things that you don't want to add too much because it can change the consistency of the paint, make it more translucent, but we won't go into all of the technical stuff right now. This is just something that I recommend at some point, and it costs me, I think this is about £7 perhaps, but it lasts so long because you literally need the tiniest amount to keep the paint wet. So yeah, the next item I do recommend getting, but it's not essential, is the primer. I did mention primer earlier, so when we were talking about the paint pad, how you can get an oil paint pad or an acrylic one, if you opt for the acrylic paint pad because it's slightly smoother, you are going to need to prime it. It's important that you prep your surface, because when you're using oil paints, unlike acrylic, it's oil based. Imagine eating like a greasy KFC and you've got your chicken fingers and then you touch maybe a paper surface, a letter or just something papery, your fingerprints are left and you can see that kind of oil seeping through the page, and basically the paper's absorbing that oil. And it works the same with oil paint. If you were to paint straight onto just a normal paper or a normal surface, depending on what it is, the oil paint over time, it could take years or it could take minutes. But over time, that oil will seep through the page or the surface you're working on, and the image will disappear. I'm sure there's paintings that I've done years ago when I didn't have a clue what I was doing with oils that I didn't prime the surface of, and there's probably no image anymore. It's probably completely vanished. Because over time the colours are going. So it's really important, even if it looks like a legit surface, a hard surface, it's really important that you're priming it with something like this, because it kind of closes all the pores, I think, of the paper. I think that's what you call it, and it makes it a safe surface to work on with your oil paint. So over time it won't seep through. It's like a secure protective layer. This one actually is a bit spenny. This product, I remember being annoyed having to buy this because the one I always get, which is literally £4, had sold out. So I had to I was in a rush to complete a commission or something. Not essential, but super handy. Okay, so the next product I'm going to discuss, again, is not an essential product, but it's super useful. And it's something that I've only recently purchased, I'd say within the last year. Bear in mind, I've been painting for years. I clearly haven't needed it, but it has made life so much easier, and if you are willing to spend a bit more money, this purchase is completely worth it. The purchase I'm referring to is a glass palette. To be honest, it looks really gross right now because I haven't cleaned it, which is really bad, tut tut. But yeah, a glass palette to mix all your paint on. It's not essential, but you do need some kind of surface to mix your paint on. The reason I didn't mention it before is because I think there's things in your house you can use to mix paints, but I would recommend buying one like this. You can actually make your own. I don't know how safe it is. I used to take the glass out of my mum's photo frames and I would work on that, and it kind of did the same thing, but it's just so unsafe. It would smash if I put too much pressure on it, or I'd forget it was there because it's a clear sheet of glass and just lean on it and it'd smash. So if you do decide to make your own, don't tell anyone that I encouraged you, but it can be done, but obviously this is a lot safer. They've got the protective edges, and it's thick, and it's also white glass, or there's a sheet under it making it white, so you don't need a white surface to put it on top of. The alternative to this, you can buy sheets of oil palettes, and it looks a bit like tracing paper or baking paper if you're not an artist but a chef. And it's basically a sheet that you can mix your paints on, and then at the end of the day when you're done, you can screw it up and bin it, and you have a new sheet to work on. If you're not willing to spend on this bougie art palette just yet, just get the pads. The next product that I want to discuss is a glass scraper. This product is only relevant if you've bought the glass palette. So if you haven't bought the glass palette and you're not planning to, you can skip this bit. But it's a glass scraper. It's literally in the name. It scrapes the glass. It's quite hard to clean oil paint off of surfaces. You could use a bit of your mineral spirit, dash it on and wipe it with a cloth or rag. But in terms of convenience, this literally, you can scrape it all up. The problem is I've left this, it's hard and I didn't clean it in time. But you can kind of see, if I put this on my leg, I'm hoping you can see, it's taking off the paint, kind of. No, imagine that was completely wet paint and I'd actually cleaned it on time. It just comes off straight away. I've been using the same blade for a while. You can see how dirty my blade is, I don't know if you can see that, but it's gross. Yeah, but look after your blades and they will last. But again, you don't need that product unless you have the glass palette. If you do have a wooden palette already, maybe you got passed down or you made it at school. I remember I had to make a wooden palette once. They still work, you can still use them, and lots of people love wooden palettes. But I do find they're difficult to clean because you can scratch the wood quite easily or stain the wood. and it's hard to see a true honest colour against the brown. Again, loads of people use it and it works for them, but for me personally, I don't recommend, and I think going forward with our future videos, it'll be easier to follow if you do have some kind of clear surface, ideally a gloss surface. Now obviously you're going to need things like pens and rulers and pencils and rubbers, but like I said, this was the essentials needed to get started with oil painting, and I'm happy to go into more detail. Put it in the comments below if something wasn't clear or explained well enough. And there's loads of other fancy things you can get. For example, this bad boy, I love him. It's a bendy light. You can literally bend it in any angle, direction, and you clip it onto your desk like that. I'm the desk. And then you can bend it over your work. This is a great purchase that I made, and it's made my life a lot easier. Some of you might be night owls and like to work in the night, so you won't have the natural daylight, so if you get one of these you can work late. I currently am using it as a lamp for my bedside table. I can't remember why, but it's so handy. But again, it's not essential, and if you're just starting out, maybe just work during the day and then you won't have to worry about things like that. Okay, so they are all of the products I use to create a painting, and if you keep watching, you'll now see me using those products to create a painting. Just keep watching. Thanks guys for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please drop it in the comments below. As a self-taught painter, I understand how important it is to have access to useful information and great content. So I hope that these videos can be helpful and give you a basic understanding of how to get started when it comes to painting faces using oil paints.